Happy Sunday, everyone. Coming at you live from our family cabin in an undisclosed location, just in case we ever need to, weather an apocalypse here and not have the hordes coming to get us. Hope you're all doing great on the day in between Independence Days. I am wearing, for those who are joining via video, one of my favorite shirts, Treason is the Reason for the Season, which my friend Julie Borowski created at libertyjunkies.com. A lot of people were asking me the other day where to get it. But why do I say the day in between Independence Days? Well, actually, July 2nd is really Independence Day. We just celebrated on the 4th. So here we are on the 3rd. You can look up that historical factoid if you want. And perhaps conveniently, I was not able to, or rather chose, given where I'm at, to not attend church today. And that was kind of an intentional decision on my part, because in years past, I've really struggled with church on or close to the 4th of July. Because very often in years past, attending sacrament meeting was an exercise in, political and nationalistic reverence, singing, so-called patriotic hymns in sacrament meeting, and the testimonies in sacrament meeting being, we're so great and land of the free and this is amazing, go America, and I love the Constitution, and all these things that don't have to do with Jesus Christ, which is the stated intent of why we gather together to take the sacrament, to be with one another in church. And so, when it came up with my schedule that I was going to be here at the cabin, I looked at the date and I thought, oh, shucks, I'm going to miss it. I distinctly recall on many occasions in the past when everyone would, stand up to sing the Star Spangled Banner or whatever, right? These nationalistic, patriotic hymns or songs that are in the hymn book, and myself and typically my family would remain seated. And not to be disrespectful, not to cause a scene, but we certainly don't have a Borg-like mentality where just because everyone else is doing something, we're going to do something as well. We try and be very intentional in our acts and do things that we think have meaning and appropriate meaning at that. And I don't think personally that it's appropriate to, stand as a sign of reverence and respect and, adoration for a politically oriented song in the middle of a sacrament meeting. And so in many occasions past, I've remained seated. And very interesting, I could actually feel the kind of laser eyes on my back from everyone else, not everyone, but other people who were like, oh, what's he doing, and it was really weird. I could actually feel something, and that's never a pleasant experience. Again, I didn't want to cause a scene. I don't want to. Oftentimes in the past, I would just walk out and, conveniently have to go to the bathroom while they sang. And so, I've thought about this issue a lot over the years, and it's a similar thought I have with respect to other holidays. Perhaps even worse with things like Mother's Day and Father's Day, which are just capitalist creations designed to sell, candy and flowers and greeting cards and the like. At least Independence Day has some type of inherently meaningful or relevant historical connection, so you could at least make that argument. Whereas with Mother's Day and Father's Day, and you go in and it's just these talks and lessons about, fathers and mothers and motherhood and fatherhood and whatever. And here we've, spent tithing money on a Snickers bar for everyone, or, those are always just weird to me. And it's I'm here to worship and talk about Jesus. Let's talk about the atonement. I come to church to be, uplifted in the Christian faith, and not these tangential things. Yes, obviously mothers and fathers are critical and very important, and the family is central, to the plan of salvation. I get it. But that's not what sacrament meeting is about. That's not what the church meetings are about. And so, why do I, give this musing the title that I do? Well, this is somewhat related to what I mentioned a week or two ago, in that, at least anecdotally, I know the political activity of my neighbors and my community. All these people who will go to a 4th of July testimony meeting and express reverence for the land of the free and our freedoms and the military that fights for our freedom and all these things, but they do nothing about it. And there's no evidence of what they are professing. There's no indication that they're actually doing anything. So I'm going to get in a moment to the few verses that pertain to this issue. But, fundamentally, it was interesting. I was doing a bit of Googling and kind of looking more into this before doing the musing, and I came across this article from a bunch of Christian pastors, evangelical, Protestant, pastor-type folks from around the world. And they were all offering comment on whether it was appropriate to display their country's flag inside their church. That was the question that was posed to them. Some said yes, some said no. One pastor said, flying the flag in church shows our loyalty as citizens. This is not unlike our church leaders saying that we should be, quote, good global citizens, an idea that, with respect, I completely reject and think is very dangerous and problematic. But here this pastor was saying, we fly the flag to show our loyalty as citizens. When I think we're here to build God's kingdom, not build up, Caesar's kingdom in this tribalistic fashion. And I'll talk more about tribalism in a second. Another one said that we proudly display the flag as a strong symbol of our nationality on the altar. Like, as it's situated in their particular church, they put the flag on the altar. I was at a wedding about a week ago in a Catholic church. First Catholic wedding I'd ever seen. It was fairly interesting in that regard. But, there's the American flag very prominently, up on the stage right next to the altar. Another pastor said, flying the flag indicates the importance of the country. But what does that have to do with coming to church and worshiping God? So all these different pastors were making these claims as to why the display of the flag inside the church was so important to them, when in my mind, it's kind of this collusion between Christ and Caesar, this what's called a syncretic gospel, a fancy term that just means the pollution of faith with kind of the political governmental structure, this kind of collusion or combination, much like the children of Israel would incorporate the kind of traditions and practices and beliefs of surrounding societies and corrupting the Jewish faith. I think we do the same thing. We, very broadly, collectively speaking, that Christianity has become polluted with the kind of nationalistic, political, cultural elements of our day. And yet, what's interesting to me is in Isaiah 40, it says, all nations before God are as nothing, and they are counted to him less than nothing and vanity. Well, that's interesting, because we're always touting up how great America is and land of the free and befriend the Constitution and all these, nationalistic Team America type things that we intertwine with the gospel. And I think other Christian faiths more so. You get a lot of this Christian nationalism and so forth, and other sects that are perhaps less international than our own. And yet here it says, all nations before God are as nothing. I think the interpretation is self-evident that we are God's children. We are all part of one family. And the carving of the human family into different tribes is inherently anti-unification, anti-God's family. It inherently divides a people that should be unified. We shouldn't have arbitrary lines on a map that put us into competing factions. It's why, despite really appreciating athletic prowess and ability and so forth, and challenge and all the rest, I think there's a big problem with sports. I think a lot of sports is idolatry. You get this tribalistic approach where, people are split up into teams, and it leads to actual animosity. It leads to negative feelings, ill will towards other people just because they are part of a different tribe. Of course, this is how, soldiers kill other people and how dictators are able to get and soldiers and others to fight those of other countries. How? By dehumanizing them, by stripping them of anything that would lead these soldiers and others to perceive them as equal and relatable, right? The Nazis, when they wanted to get Germans to gas the Jews, they would call them vermin, subhuman, like it was an intentional effort to dehumanize them. And so before any war, you get psychological war, where you attack the other side, you strip them of their humanity, you show them as, infidels or barbarians or savages or whatever, in an effort to frame the narrative in such a way where you no longer relate to those people. It was very interesting. A few years ago, I watched a documentary by Rick Steves, who writes all these travel guides and used to, or perhaps still today has, like a YouTube channel and documentaries and so forth. And he was in Iran. I think I wrote about this in Feardom. And so he was in Iran, and he had to get like special permission to go in there. And it was this documentary about, the amazing sights and culture of Iran. And he had like a government agent following him to make sure they weren't saying or doing anything unflattering to Iran. And there were these amazing, beautiful locations and museums and archaeological sites and so forth. And as he's interviewing all these people, they're going over and over up to Rick Steves and saying, our countries are like battling one another or don't like each other, but we love Americans. We love you guys. And like they're coming up to Rick and telling him all these things. And so, it shows that as foreign policy, as there's this agitation for attacking other people and creating all this ill will between governments, like ultimately what they have to do is get us as brothers and sisters to fight one another. And I think politics is inherently divisive. It is something exclusionary rather than inclusionary. In other words, politics is defined by who the other is, who you are not affiliated with, who is outside your tribe. We have to, defeat them, attack them, suppress them, kill them, whatever. There are inherently lines drawn in the sand, and whoever's not with you is against you, and then you have to defeat them. That is inherently what politics is reduced to. That is what we celebrate when we celebrate nationalism and patriotism and all the like. Meanwhile, the gospel of Christ is inclusionary. It's welcoming all. It's inviting all to come to Christ. And so I think the two really don't mix. And yet many people try and mix them in this like syncretic gospel where we can, sing the patriotic songs and bear testimony of political things in church. And I think they're inherently divisive. God said, love your enemies, right? Bless them that persecute you. And that is completely inconsistent with the political process, with nation states, with Caesar. And the problem, I think, with all of it is that we delude ourselves. We delude ourselves into thinking that we can combine both. We delude ourselves into thinking that we can be patriotic and Christian at the same time, when I think that's not necessarily true. So we all know this story, but I'm going to read a few verses and encourage us to consider this story as it pertains to 4th of July sacrament meetings, where we talk about, the land of the free and how great America is and all these things. When in reality, again, like I posted on Facebook last night, inviting people to this homework assignment where it's like, if you go read the Declaration of Independence and you read the list of grievances that the founding fathers felt justified in seceding from the strongest empire, most powerful nation on the earth, you read those grievances and you compare them to today, to our experience in living under the federal government today, and sincerely ask yourself, did they experience more freedom or do we experience more freedom? Which government is more oppressive to its citizens, right? Today's government or that of King George? And when you really start to analyze those grievances compared to the grievances you and I might have about our government today, I think the question answers itself. I think any fair assessment would suggest, that today's government can be and is more oppressive to its people than King George was to the colonies. And yet they felt justified in doing what they did. And so then we go around and say, land of the free, yeah. And I'm like, should we look at the list of grievances? Is it really the land of the free? Or is this some kind of like superficial slogan that you felt good saying for decades, but you've done nothing about to fight for freedom? You really have no idea what it's like. Try standing up to the government, be a, Julian Assange, and try and expose the evils of the military-industrial complex, and you'll see pretty quickly, how much of the land of the free it is. Or try drinking raw milk, or keeping chickens in your backyard, or selling lemonade on the side of the road without getting a permission slip, or whatever, right? Like, we could run down the list. Look at the income tax when it was first introduced and how tiny it was to justify its existence, and now how it's grown so massively, like 10x or more beyond what it ever was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so these people who go up and they say, land of the free and all the things, and then do nothing about it, and they're cheering on this status quo that is degraded so far from where the founding fathers ever envisioned it, you look at them and you say, what are you celebrating? What are you giving thanks for? And what have you done about it? So with all of that in mind, here is Alma chapter 31, verses 21 and moving forward. Now the place was called by them Rameumptom. You guys know this story. Which being interpreted is the holy stand. Now from this stand they did offer up every man the selfsame prayer unto God, thanking their God that they were chosen of him, and that he did not lead them away after the tradition of their brethren, and that their hearts were not stolen away to believe in things to come which they knew nothing about. Now after the people had all offered up thanks after this manner, they returned to their homes, never speaking of their God again, until they had assembled themselves together again to the holy stand to offer up thanks after their manner. Now when Alma saw this, his heart was grieved, for he saw that they were a wicked and a perverse people. Yea, he saw that their hearts were set upon gold and upon silver and all manner of fine goods. Yea, he also saw that their hearts were lifted up unto great boasting in their pride. And he lifted up his voice to heaven and cried, saying, Oh, how long, O Lord, wilt thou suffer that thy servants shall dwell here below in the flesh, to behold such gross wickedness among the children of men? Behold, O God, they cry unto thee, and yet their hearts are swallowed up in their pride. Behold, O God, they cry unto thee with their mouths, while they are puffed up even to greatness with the vain things of the world. So, in an effort to understand how those verses might apply to us, and to our situation today, which is the whole point of having scripture. Not to dismiss, those silly people in the Rameumptom, how could they do that? How silly to not think of God or do anything. We're better than that. We don't do that. And yet I think in this context, we collectively are quite guilty of that, right? It's people who go up to say how great we are, and so glad I'm not any of those other people over there. And then they go away to never think or do anything about it again, until the next time that they go do that. And I think this really relates to how so many of the people who express gratitude for living in the land of the free, and thank a soldier, and grateful to live where we do, and the promised land, and all these things, do nothing about it other than maybe vote, if that. And if they do vote, they often call, someone and say, who should I vote for? They just vote for whoever they're thinking of. And then maybe they'll go bear their testimony on the next 4th of July. And they'll blow up some fireworks and have a fun barbecue, right? And many, many of us are guilty of this. This is what I titled today's musing as a patriotic Mormon Rameumptom. Because as I read these verses, I think it fairly describes the circumstances today where people are all too willing to express thanks for something that they do not experience and do nothing to fight for. And they have the audacity to go up on stage in front of everyone and, vocalize these feelings that are often, despite being well-intentioned, ignorant and inadequate and not supported by any commensurate action in their lives. And so that to me is kind of Rameumptom-like. That to me is an indication of doing much like what the verses here say. O God, they cry unto thee with their mouths while they are puffed up even to greatness with the vain things of the world. Team America, America, right? All the things. How great we are. So glad we're not one of those other countries. And I think this is a problem that we definitely see today. I came across this quote from someone on Facebook this morning. This is from Rough Stone Rolling, which is by Richard Bushman. Interestingly, this book is fairly divisive among some people. You know, when Rough Stone Rolling first came out, Deseret Book wouldn't even sell it. And among many church members, it was perceived as this, like, you know, liberal, anti-Joseph, you know, screed from this intellectual, and we all know what the scriptures say about intellectuals, and pride go before the fall, and stay away from this book, because it portrays Joseph in an unflattering manner. Whereas, you know, I read the book, and it built up my testimony of Joseph. Here was this very imperfect person who God was able to turn into this, like, phenomenal, amazing man. And to me, it was a confidence builder to say, despite my imperfections and problems, God can make something out of me. And so a lot of church members really didn't like, oh, you know, Joseph looked in a hat at a stone, what? You know, and I think part of the problem is we haven't been really openly talking about history, and we've had a very sanitized version growing up in church culture. But nonetheless, so I typically encourage people to read the book. I think it's a very interesting insight into Joseph, and does a really good job at portraying him in a more realistic way than a lot of kind of church biographies might do that try and kind of deify the man. And so anyways, this is a quote from Rough Stone Rolling that I think encapsulates a lot of what I've talked about in weeks and months past, but certainly pertains to this topic today. It's talking about the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is at the center of this pivotal restoration moment. Talks about, so it says, the book works on the premise that a book can reconstitute a nation. The book was to inform Israel of its true history. And then here we go. This is the interesting part in my mind. All this turned American history upside down, the restoration of the Book of Mormon. The story of Israel overshadowed the history of American liberty. Literal Israel stood at the center of history, not the United States. The book sacralized, or made sacred, the land, but condemned the people. The Indians, or Native Americans, were the chosen ones, not the European interlopers. The Book of Mormon was the seminal text, not the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. The gathering of lost Israel, not the establishment of liberty, was the great work. In the Book of Mormon, the biblical overwhelms the national. Taken as a whole, the Book of Mormon can be read as a document of profound social protest against the dominant culture of Joseph Smith's time. That may not have been most readers' first impression. Many converts said it confirmed their old beliefs. The book read like the Bible to them. Its gospel was standard Christianity. The book patriotically honored America by giving it a biblical history. And yet, on closer reading, the Book of Mormon contests the amalgam of Enlightenment, Republican, Protestant, capitalist, and nationalist values that constituted American culture. The combination is not working, the book says. America is too Gentile, too worldly, too hard-hearted. The Gentiles, quote, put down the poor and miracles of God and preach up unto themselves their own wisdom and their own learning, that they may get gain and grind upon the faces of the poor, end quote. The nation must, and scriptural citation, this is all still Bushman's quote. The nation must remember God and restore Israel or be blasted. And then here wrapping up, the Book of Mormon proposes a new purpose for America, becoming a realm of righteousness rather than an empire of liberty. Against increasing wealth and inequality, the Book of Mormon advocates the cause of the poor. Against the subjection of the Indians, it promises the continent to the native people. Against Republican government, it proposes righteous rule by judges and kings under God's law, which I would contest, and as I've talked about in previous musings, it absolutely does not propose kings. If anything, it was the brother of Jared and Nephi and Alma and others, saying kings are a bad idea, concentration of power is a bad idea. So in that, I disagree with Bushman. It was not proposing kings by any means. It was proposing decentralized and self-sovereign rule. But nonetheless, continuing and concluding, he says, against a closed canon Bible and non-miraculous religion, the Book of Mormon stands for ongoing revelation, miracles, and revelation to all nations. Against skepticism, it promotes belief. Against nationalism, a universal Israel. It foresees disaster for the nation if the love of riches, resistance to revelation, and Gentile civilization prevail over righteousness, revelation, and Israel. So I thought that was interesting because too often I think we can get politically myopic and focus on our team. Tribalism definitely intoxicates us into supporting the home team to the exclusion of others. And you might say, well, just because I love America doesn't mean I hate, Bangladesh or, China or North Korea or whatever. But then you look throughout history and that is actually not true. How many times do people get caught up in their tribalistic tendencies when they are told by the leaders of their own tribe to attack other people? This is the mythos of Caesar. This is the intoxicating power of tribalism, where people are willing to harm and fight and kill other people who are not part of their tribe because they are persuaded to do so by Caesar. They are convinced through propaganda and other means that they must and should attack those other people. Look at, you can go way back in history, but look at how the Japanese were treated here in America. American citizens, fellow countrymen, and yet because of fear and tribalism and all the rest, tons of them were rounded up and they were put in internment camps and subjected to all kinds of misery and death just because they happened to have a particular heritage and be part of a different tribe. Where were the Christians? Where were the Mormons? Where were people advocating, those are our brothers and sisters and this is wrong and stop being tribalistic and stop being so nationalistic, and it's not about, what country they're a part of or what their heritage is. All are alike unto God. Or as Isaiah says, all nations before God are as nothing. And yet I think not only were Christians actively participating in the internment of the Japanese and all the rest, they certainly, from, my review of history, were not, with few exceptions, vocally opposing it. These people who are so quick to claim a love for the land of the free are often so whipped up in the tribalism of nationalist politics that, again, like Maxwell says, it's kind of the summer cottage in Babylon. It's a mixed religion of convenience, that when you're more Christian, you're more Christian. When you're more political, you're more political, but you fuse the two. You don't see the apparent conflict. You try to serve two masters, which means you start to love or hate the other, and we know how that goes. God in Revelation talks about how because you're neither hot nor cold, but instead lukewarm, I'll spew thee out of my mouth. In other words, you're not picking a team. God wants us to choose. He's a jealous God. He doesn't tolerate the mixture and the pollution and the syncretic religion and trying to worship and adore Caesar and, flags and the arm of flesh. And so it's all these things why I today am not at church, and why in years past I've really struggled with the 4th of July, because I see fellow, neighbors and friends and people, and not just where I live now, but in many wards past, going up on the Rameumptom and saying how great we are and go team, and then to do nothing about it until the next time that it was time to go up on the Rameumptom, the next 4th of July. And, whatever the verse said there, never again to, think of God in that case, but, freedom in this case, or what we've been counseled to do. And that to me is the struggle, because I know what these people do or don't do. And granted, I don't know perfectly. There are, private lives and I can't know everything, but I think it's apparent enough over the years, the, apathy and the indifference and the inaction from people to put their shoulder to the wheel, as it were, and try and do anything about community problems of civic consequence, and try and, fight for the freedom that they claim to love. And even if they all did great at that, even if there was not this kind of hypocrisy and this Rameumptom nature of, pride that Alma talks about, and being puffed up in their hearts about these things and hypocritical, even if that didn't exist, I still feel it would be inappropriate to be talking about our tribe at church, because I think God is not a respecter of tribes, or as Isaiah said, nations. I believe that is an inappropriate element inside our church service. And frankly, it's why I'm glad in part that the church is working on a new hymnal that last I was told, will be stripped of any type of, political or patriotic hymns. I think that's a good move. I think we shouldn't have that. People blew up fireworks last night. They'll blow them up tomorrow night. There's plenty of places for worshiping Caesar or celebrating freedom and all the like. I just don't think that church is the place to do it. I go to church to worship Christ, to think about God. And you could, but God has told us to befriend the Constitution, and God has said that he raised up these founding fathers. Sure, you can make any number of tangents, just like God has, praised motherhood and fatherhood. Therefore, let's celebrate Father's Day and Mother's Day. And, sacrament meeting and church are not for the tangents. They're for the core essence of the gospel. Leave the tangents for other discussions and other times and, other things. But I think it's inappropriate in our central service of the church to be tainting it with political and patriotic things. And so, whether that continues or not, I don't know with the exclusion of those hymns. I assume that will wane. But certainly we're still going to have these testimonies, and we're going to have these expressions and prayers of perfunctory and hypocritical patriotism that not only don't hold a place in our church meetings, but I think are hypocritical when these people are otherwise apathetic, and like those at the Rameumptoms stand, don't even think about this stuff or care about it until the next time that they need to go, put on this public performance and express this gratitude for something they've done nothing to contribute to. So with that, and my treason is the reason for the season shirt, I bid you adieu. Happy Independence Day tomorrow, but today maybe we focus just on Christ and not think about that other stuff or worship it or have it part of our worship. And we'll see how things go next year. I don't know when that hymn book comes out. I've lost track of that. I know it's like a big project that they're doing, but I'll be very curious to see what changes. But I don't know, man. If I was ever in a bishopric, I would be campaigning for no Mother's Day celebration, no Father's Day celebration, none of this tangential peripheral stuff. I think what we need is more potency in our sacrament meetings. I think it gets really dull when people are assigned to just read a general conference talk, or not read it, but base their talk on that, because then these people do none of their own or very little investigation and research and thinking and pondering. They have a structure in place. They read snippets. They add their own little commentary, and it becomes so superficial, man. It becomes, I don't know, we need more potency. We need more oomph. We need more meat. We need more, in-depth worship of Christ. And I think this political patriotic stuff is a distraction, but I think there's much bigger problems of spiritual illiteracy and apathy beyond just this. Although I think this contributes to it. We got a lot of work to do. I got a lot of work to do. I'm not on my own Rameumptom here. I'm not perfect. I'm working on a lot of this stuff. But the first part of working on something is recognizing that challenge or problem exists, and uncomfortable as it may be, because this is very much part of our church culture in America, probably in other countries to some extent too, but it very much is this American culture thing, despite the fact that, early members of the church basically fled America and, detested how inadequate the legal protections were under the Constitution for them, and had to go set up their own government. And of course, things have totally changed, especially in the last century, where saints went from, kind of abandoning America to trying to show that they were the best Americans, and, meat, potatoes, and Mitt Romney and all the rest. Things have changed quite a bit, and I think the culture has shifted to our detriment. And I think we need to remove the culture, in this case from the church, focus just on Christ, leave aside the political and patriotic things outside of our faith, or rather outside of our church meetings, I should say, and try and really improve our focus on Jesus, and not the tangents and not the cultural stuff, but really go deeper into our relationship with Jesus. I would love to see more emphasis on that. I would love to see us rise to the occasion and not kind of fall to this lower standard that I feel like a lot of our church culture is at. But I'm not the person to make that change, and who knows who is. I think we all are together. Maybe talking about it is the first step. But enough talking for today. That's enough for one musing. I'm going to go have a good day here and relax in nature a bit. And hope you get, in fact, if you didn't see on Instagram and Facebook, I posted yesterday, there was this moose just outside the door right here that was hanging out for almost 3 hours. So that was a lot of fun. We've had hummingbirds and squirrels, and I think I saw a bunny this morning, and I saw a family of turkeys yesterday. There's like 8 or 9 tiny little turkeys following mom and dad. It was a lot of fun. So I'm going to go enjoy the rest of my day. I hope you guys do the same. We'll see you next week. Happy Independence Day tomorrow, and I hope you guys have a good Sabbath. See ya.